Hey everyone, I'm going to tell you why I think this is a 5-star book. But first, what is it? It is Shadow of a Dark Queen, the first book of the Serpentwar Saga by Raymond E. Feist. It forms part of the Riftwar Cycle, which is Feist's massive 30-book series of books. And if you know all this, you can probably just skip ahead to the next video chapter. The whole cycle is split up into series which can be read completely standalone, but they do build on each other. It's one of those series where the author just kept writing extra stuff in that world because the fans wanted it. So where does this fit in? Well, first of all, Feist published Magician in 1982, which was a complete standalone novel. And that is a fantastic book. It's worth noting the setting because it's similar to how Malazan grew out of an RPG campaign, a role-playing game campaign, and the worlds of the Riftwar Cycle grew out of basically a D&D campaign that Feist and some of his uni friends invented. And it has elves and dwarves and all that kind of fantasy stuff, but actually some of the books don't feature them very much at all. So Magician came out, it was a standalone, but then that was expanded into 2 other novels, Silverthorn and A Darkness at Sethanon, and that became known as the Riftwar Saga. Then he collaborated with Janny Wirtz on what was called the Empire Trilogy, which is fantastic. Then he wrote 2 more books, which were called The Crondor's Sons, Duology, Prince of the Blood, and The King's Buccaneer. And then we come to this, published in 1994. It's been way too long since I read a Feist. I read The Way of Kings. I read The King's Buccaneer back in 2019, 5 years ago. So that's the context. Now on to the actual book. It's a bit hard to describe the plot without giving away too much. Suffice it to say, it's about a group of essentially men that should be dead. And they're sent on a mission to infiltrate an enemy army against really bad odds. And there's some coming of age stuff around the main character. And in that respect, it's a little bit like the first book, Magician. In that book, there's the coming of age of Pug and Thomas. The prologue dumps you straight into a fantasy environment. There's lizard men, there's foreign words, there's place names that aren't even on the map. In fact, the place where the prologue is set is a total mystery. There's no map of where the prologue is set, and it doesn't even quite become apparent throughout the book where that place is. It's one of those cases where the prologue you just have to let it wash over you, and maybe once you've read the book or halfway through, you go back and reread it and you have the context. There's a slightly odd choice in that there is the cast of characters in the start of the book, and it has some of the future plot points in the descriptions, which is interesting. So why am I giving it 5 stars? Well, basically it is the characters and the pacing and the intrigue. I love the character descriptions, i.e. how they look. Usually character descriptions just wash over me. By the next day, I just have forgotten everything, whereas in this case were such that I could actually visualize them and really had a good handle on what the people look like. There's also really lovely character work, and every character feels distinct. He also really gets into the main characters' heads. When he describes some scenes, I felt like he was really describing the same kind of thoughts that I would have in that situation. For example, when the main character kills a man for the first time, and that's not really a spoiler, it's a fantasy book, there's usually lots of killing. Anyway, when the main character kills for the first time, which is totally justified, Feist deals with the emotions and the thoughts that the character has in a very realistic way. Not that I know from experience what that would be like, just letting you know, but what he writes seems to me to be believable. He doesn't just treat it like it would be all fine and dandy. In some books, this kind of event happens and it's just passed over. For some reason, it's rare for authors to get that kind of thing right. Even minor characters feel distinct and real, and all the main characters go through growth and development in kind of enjoyable ways, although that does lessen as the book goes on. There's also an interesting writing technique that Feist uses, which I think Brandon Sanderson also uses, and that is that each chapter jumps in time. So it could be several weeks later or a month later or just a few days. The chapter will just start straight into a scene, but it's always apparent how much time has passed. And that's without all that kind of connecting guff like several days later or, so they continue training for the next week. You don't need it. It's just bang, we're into the next thing. I can't recall if Feist did that in the previous books because it's been so long since I read them, but it really keeps the pace moving. Oh, and although most of the characters are new, there are some characters from the previous books that kind of show up at various points in time. And through some of that, we kind of get to see the progress in time through the kingdom. Like this is set a number of years after the previous books. Are there any negatives? Really only one. There was just one place towards the end of the book where I just wasn't clear where on the map that the party was. It was just a little bit confusing, but that's pretty minor. So would I recommend it? Yes, definitely. If you haven't read the first series, then what are you doing? You should go and read that. But if you've only read the first series, definitely continue on to this one because it's looking to be really good. Quick note on the maps. This is one of those cases where the paperback suffers a little bit because everything is so tiny and the gap in the middle of the page chops some stuff out. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same map that we've gotten in all the other books. The island of Navindus also makes an appearance, which was in the previous 2 books. They're pretty cool, pretty typical fantasy maps. I give them 4 out of 5. So that's it. Definite 5-star book from me. If you've read this and want to leave a comment, I'd like to know what you think of these books. And if you haven't, are you planning on reading these and when? Okay, I will see you in the next video. See ya.